Yes, that's a tough one. This week, I was looking through my Twitter feed. Dangerous pastime, I know. I do that frequently. I have people I follow. I love to see kind of what's out there. And there was this this isn't a surprise. There was an interesting debate. Social media is just ripe for all kinds of debates. But I saw somebody posted a video. Well-known financial Christian guy had made a video, and he was answering the question somebody had asked him. And the question was this, the guy owned some rental properties, and the question was, so if I own rental properties, can you be a good Christian and adjust the rental rate to match current market rate? Okay, think about that for a second. The guru guy, the financial guy, he also had rental properties, and so he mentioned these things. He said, well, first, we need to make sure that we treat others the way we want to be treated. And I thought, okay, yep, that's good. And he said, we need to be willing to show grace and mercy to people and kindness. And I thought, yep, that's all. I'm tracking with you there. And he followed that up by saying, but if you raise the rate on your rental property, and this, whether you need to or not, that's irrelevant, but if you raise it to meet market rate, and the people can no longer afford to live there, he said, that it wasn't you that kicked them out of the property, it was the market that kicked them out of the property. Think about that for a second. Does that create a little tension in you a little bit? Maybe? Well, like I said, that kind of a video, that comment is just ripe for social media just to blow up, which it did. And there were a lot of people chiming in to speak on this, but there was really one guy that I saw chiming in that I thought had a very interesting response. He had a lengthy thread, and the guy's from Kansas City, and he also owns rental property. But he commented this. He said this. He says, we have a 3-bedroom house that rents for $600 a month to a retired Latino couple. We haven't raised the rental rate in 10 years. The market says we could rent it for $1,000 a month. No applause necessary. That itself feels greedy. Let's be real. Someone else literally pays my mortgage building my wealth. He went on to talk about how helping people through this, keeping rental rates low, but then he also talked about he didn't think that was good long-term solution, so he worked in helping low-income families get financing to be able to buy properties for, like foreclosed and all these properties that may not be, like we have in West Des Moines, because he found that often if they could buy it, their mortgage payment would even be less than what rent was. So that was one of the things that he was doing. So why am I telling you this? Well, part of it is I just love to build tension. Does anybody feel a little tension right now in the room? Because you just kind of go, wow, this is kind of uncomfortable. In fact, I was telling Liz I was going to do this in the office this week, and she's like, are you sure? I said, yeah, it's going to be tense. It'll be all right. But you can feel the tension, right? I feel it in me because I feel two things within me kind of doing this right now. One of them is the capitalistic side of Brent that says, grow business, make money, feed the economy, those kind of things. But then believe it or not, I do have a compassionate side. And I feel those two things just kind of pulling and tugging at each other. And you don't have to answer this out loud, but here's the question. What would you do? What would you do? And how would you advise that person to their original question? Because they wanted to know, what would a good Christian do? And you love that, right? What would a good Christian do? Not a bad Christian, a good Christian. Where do we cross the line between our care for others and our community and good stewardship? That's tough, isn't it? That's what we want to dive into today. We're in this series we're calling All Things New, joining God in the renewal of all things. And so far, we've looked at personally, how we need to be personally about renewal in ourselves, that we're new creations in Christ, but we join with him on this side to help in the renewal, to join with. It's not something that just happens to us, that we have to be actively and intentionally pursuing that. And so we talked about that. And then last week we talked about church renewal. And we talked about, that we can't rest on the way things used to be as a church, and that in a new world, we need to reorient the church a little bit. It's beyond religion, it's beyond consumers, and it's beyond Sunday even. And it's that thought of it's beyond Sunday that I want us to kind of delve into today and look at as we talk about how do we renew our communities. Because we do believe that community renewal should be something that takes place. But this is an interesting idea because for so many years, the church, us, we were really only primarily interested in one thing, spiritual renewal. And if it wasn't about spiritual renewal, we really weren't interested in anything else. We only wanted to tell people about Jesus. And yes, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It is an important thing. But if we believe Jesus changes lives, if we believe that he's worth giving everything up to follow, then yeah, we should be out there telling other people about him, right? I mean, that should be just part of it. But the problem of it was our focus, it was our exclusive focus. Because it was almost like, and this may be the extreme, but it was like, you're hungry and you need food. Well, okay, but let me tell you about Jesus first. Or you can't pay your rent. Well, let me just tell you, Jesus has all the riches you'll ever need. I mean, we say that here, and it sounds absurd, doesn't it? Oh, it does to me. It sounds just ridiculous. But that's really a lot of ways of how the church responded for a long time. And so we lived with this disconnect between the physical and the spiritual worlds. And what we discover is that, I hope we've discovered, is that as a church, we can't have these worlds disconnected. The physical needs of people impact their spiritual needs and vice versa. And we have to be willing to lean into both worlds. And you have to care in order to be able to do this. And really, you have to understand that community renewal, which involves the love and support of our neighbors, is part of the reason that we're still here. It's part of the reason that we still exist in this world. It's not to come to this worship service every week. It's important. Whether you're here or watching online, I hope you feel encouraged. I hope this is a part of spiritual growth and development, being in this body around other people, to be encouraged and renewed on a weekly basis. But it's not just here. This isn't just the end all of what we're trying to do. And when we when we turn to the Bible and kind of see, okay, what can we glean from the Bible? What does the Bible actually have to say about renewing communities? What's interesting is we can jump back to the Old Testament and we find an interesting story. And it's the story of Israel. That's what the Old Testament is about. And they had kind of this fairy tale relationship with God. Where out of nowhere, God calls Abraham and he says, I'm going to bless you. You're going to be multiplied. You're going to have descendants that are as many as the stars in the heaven. And he makes a covenant with him, a promise to him that he would do this, that he would bless him and his descendants. And part of this covenant, part of this promise was to lead Abraham to the promised land where God was going to give him this land to occupy and to set up and live in. And that's the land we know as Israel. But part of the covenant did include them committing themselves to God. That he said, look, this covenant is, you need to focus on me. We need to have this relationship, but not to seek after and worship false gods and obey the law. And you don't have to get very far into the story to see that they didn't keep their end of the deal. They very quickly, once they were established and set up, they turned their back on God. And so after a lot of turbulent times, God allowed them to be attacked and allowed their city to be destroyed, and almost all of them taken into captivity by this ruthless pagan nation of Babylon. And as you can imagine, think for just a moment, if that were to happen to us today. If we were invaded and instead of taking us captive here, they pushed us off. Canada invaded and we're all rounded up to move into Canada. How easy would that be for us? You think we'd go quietly? We think we'd go peacefully? You think you'd settle into that new life up there and just be like, oh, okay, it's all right, eh? We know what it's about, got that? But no, we would want to fight back and we would do whatever we could to damage our captors and get back home. And as they were thinking this way, there were prophets that would rise up. And these prophets would basically feed into this mentality and they'd go, hey, don't worry about it. It's not going to happen long. This is going to be short term. I've heard from God. God has spoken to me. And let me just tell you what's going to happen. But the problem with this was that these prophets were wrong. They were telling people what the people wanted to hear. They were not telling them a message from God. But then God raises up a prophet. He raises up a guy, and he actually speaks to someone, and it's the prophet Jeremiah. And he gives Jeremiah this message, and we find out what this message is because Jeremiah writes it down and sends it by courier to the people as they're in exile. And this is in Jeremiah chapter 29. Look at what happens here. It says, "This is the text of the letter that the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles and the priests, the prophets, and all the other people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." So here we go. We've got this letter coming. What does the letter say? We're jumping to verse 4. "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Also seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams they encourage you to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord." This would have been an incredibly surprising turn of events for these people. The false prophets telling everybody exactly what they wanted to hear. Don't worry, this won't last long. And Jeremiah sends this letter, and it's the exact opposite. Settle in. You're going to be here a while. Which leads to kind of an important conversation or question or something to think about. Why would God tell the people that the false prophets were speaking falseness, lies? Because he knows that our attitude, how we view our current situation, will impact what we do where we are, right? So if we're here temporarily, Des Moines is a very transient area. That's one of the things that has amazed me throughout the years of being here in Iowa. I have seen so many people come into Ashworth and leave because of transfers into the city and out. If you move to Des Moines because of a job change, and you know that job change is only going to be a couple of years, how are you going to respond to the community? You're probably not much, right? I mean, you're just here temporarily. I'm not going to get used to too much because why? I'm not probably going to expend a lot of relational energy to build new relationships because I'm only here for a couple of years. Why would I? If I'm not going to be here, I don't want to invest all this time. You'd save your time and your money for where you're going to be and where you're going to land and where you're going to end up. And that's really what the Israelites thought as well. Why invest here? We're not going to settle down. We're not going to do anything because we want to get back home. That's where we need to be. And think about how this might even play out for us today as the church. Because, for many years, the church has proclaimed a message, this world is not my home, which it's not. We'll talk in just a little bit. We're going to look in the New Testament. We are aliens and strangers. We're exiles. So there is some truth there. But does that mean our response is supposed to be, this place doesn't matter? Let's just keep forward focused. That one day when I get to glory, when I get to heaven, because that's all that's important. You see, when we focus on that, when we focus on what is to come instead of where God has us, we don't invest, we don't care. And it kind of gave the church an excuse to have this mentality that really didn't care about or invest in our communities. In fact, kind of the unspoken mantra of the church was, well, let's build churches, not communities. See a problem with that? There should be a problem with that. You see, it's like the church, we were just all sitting around waiting to be raptured. Just come get me, Jesus. And there's a problem there. The guy I was talking about earlier that responded to the video, he tweeted something else later in the week, and here's what he said. He says, what's attractive about a faith that is only concerned about the afterlife, which is most prominent in American evangelicalism right now, is that it gives us cover to serve both God and money. Ouch. But I think there's truth there. I think it gives us the excuse. If all we're doing is waiting for that future land, that future glory, it gives us the excuse to say, well, then why do I care about here and now? And there's something that God is saying to the Israelites, the exiles, those being held captive in a hostile land, hoping to go home soon, hoping to get out of here. And God tells them something that I think we need to listen to today as well. Settle in. You see, there's several things I think we can see from what God tells the people. And the first is simply this, is that no matter where we are, that we need to acknowledge that God had a hand in where we are. God can use us wherever we are. Jeremiah says, God said, tell those that I have carried off into exile. You see, it would be very easy for the people to kind of remove God from the situation, and maybe we want to do that too. To assume that God was busy or distracted, and once he knew our situation, once God is aware of where we are, he'll get involved and he'll rescue us. However, this wasn't the case. God knew where they were. God knows where we are. And in fact, God allowed it to happen to them. And then they had a choice. Their choice was either to bemoan where they were or to see this as the beginning of a new way to relate to God. We can gripe about where we are, or we can see that, okay, even where I am, God can use this. Now, here's a question. Again, you don't have to answer it out loud, but just think for a moment. Where are you now? Not physically. I know you're at church or you're watching online. But think about a situation in your life. Maybe there's something in your life and you look at it and you go, oh, this is horrible. There's no way God is in this. Is it possible that where you are and what you're experiencing and what you're going through, that God is using it? That God is planning to do something through it, but yet we're so focused on something else that we're missing how God might be using where we're at? Are we going to get stuck in that mentality that just gripes about where we are, or do we begin to see, okay, this, even if it's, if we look at it and we go, there's no way God did this to me. Okay, I'll give you that. But is there still a way that God could use it? And we find a new way to experience and relate to God. That's the first step. God was going to reveal something new, something different to himself about the people of Israel, even as they had been taken from their homeland, even as they were exiles. We can see it as a beginning, a new way to relate to God. And I think that is a healthy reminder for us. God can use us wherever we are. We can see and experience God regardless of where our address may be or what circumstances we may be going through. God can and will use it. Now, that would be surprising for the people. What do you mean God did this? Oh, yeah. God had his hand in this, so it's probably a good idea to see what is God teaching me through this. And so this whole message of Jeremiah is so incredibly surprising to them, because then he lists several imperatives for the people to follow. Did you catch those? He said, build houses, settle down, plant gardens and eat. What does that mean? Well, that means we're going to be here to plant. It also means we're going to be here for harvest. So that means instead of we're going home next month, well, now we're here for at least a planting season. Oh, this gets worse for them. Then he says, marry and have sons and daughters. Now we're here for a generation. Now we're here for a little bit longer. And then he says, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so they can marry and have sons and daughters. Now we're looking at multiple generations being here in exile. What is God saying? You're not going home anytime soon. That'd be shocking. Who wants to hear that message? Certainly not this crowd. In the face of all the false prophets were saying, don't worry, Jeremiah says, hold on. We're going to be here a while. And Jeremiah is telling this, make yourselves at home. Make yourselves at home. Okay. Now put yourselves again in their shoes. This wouldn't be what you wanted to hear. You want to go home. And you told that most likely, those of us in my generation, you're not going home. Think about that. Because he tells me to have kids. I've done that. But then he tells my kids to have kids. And so it's going to be that generation, my grandchildren, even possibly my great-grandchildren are the ones that might be able to go home. I'm not going to get to go. How would you react? I don't know about you, but I kind of become stubborn, resistant, pushing back. That's kind of my nature. You know, tell me what to do, I'll do the opposite kind of thing. I would start criticizing. I'd start raising a ruckus. I'd start doing anything I could so that I could be a thorn in the flesh of the people who had me, so they might be willing to say, okay, you're just too much trouble. Not the first time I would have heard that. You're too much trouble, go home. But for the people, the imperatives continue. What's Jeremiah say? He says, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city and pray for it. Seek the peace and the prosperity of the city. Not only do we have to be here, which is bad enough, but now Jeremiah is saying you need to be contributing members of society. You need to be actively working towards the good of where you are. Think about that. That is not the message you want to hear. Why do I want to help these people who have taken me captive? What it means is that where I would want to be subversive and maybe sabotage things, to be a thorn in their flesh, don't do that. Where it might mean that I don't want to just engage with the culture, I want to separate myself and I want to step out of this and go my own way. I can't do that. I'm told to engage and to be a part of it. That would be really challenging. God says, don't do those things. He says, seek, actively pursue, strive for. There's an effort that we have to make. It's not sit back and just, okay, don't do bad things. It's actually do something for. Isn't that the critical piece? It's not going to happen on its own. Peace is not going to happen just if we sit back. And God is telling the people, I want you to be actively engaged in bringing about something new, something different. Peace and prosperity to the city. And what's interesting is the word seek there, if you look at how it's used in other parts of the Old Testament, it's the same word that in Jeremiah is used later in this passage where it says, seek God and you will find him if you seek him with all your heart. We should be pursuing the community welfare as much as we are pursuing God. Oh, think about that. Let's just stop right there. Can we say that we have done both equally? Have we been as much about the welfare of the city as we have been building our churches, building ourselves, building our stuff? And yet the idea is we are to strive for community renewal just as much as we strive after God. And what's interesting, the last part of this is he tells Jeremiah, he tells the people, he says, and pray for them. Pray for the city. Pray for the people around you. What's that mean? He says you have to lean into both worlds. You have to lean into the physical and the spiritual. And there's some irony here that I don't think I would have missed without the help of a commentary. But earlier in Jeremiah, God had instructed Jeremiah multiple times to not pray for his own people. Don't pray for the people of Israel. And yet here, he's telling them now to pray for those who have taken you captive, where you're living. What a message. What a difficult pill to swallow for these people, where he says, don't separate yourself, don't subvert, don't sabotage. He says, but seek the peace. Now, for that word peace, it's shalom. And we translate it peace, but man, we're missing the depth of that word, because the shalom is the wholeness, the fullness. It's not just a lack of conflict. It's seeking the wholeness of the community. That's what they're talking about here. So, as you look at this, what's fascinating is, once again, what God is telling the people here. I think we can pull this forward, because we are called strangers and aliens and exiles in this world. That as followers of Jesus, we are citizens of a different kingdom. We're citizens under King Jesus. But we're here. And how are we supposed to respond? I think it's exactly what we're told here. I think it's exactly what Jeremiah is telling the people, that we are to think differently. Because in God's economy, what we think will bring about the greatest change probably won't, and what we think won't work probably will. Author N.T. Wright says this. He says, serving the true God by peacefully living a peaceful, wise, and visibly good life is, in the end, far more revolutionary than simply overthrowing one corrupt regime and replacing it by, well, most likely by another, as history shows. It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? You go over to the New Testament, and as I said, we see something very similar in the book of 1 Peter, where Peter's writing to the Christians there. And listen to what Peter says. He says, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us." What's he call us? Foreigners, exiles. And then he points out something equally important. He says, look, don't surrender your values. Don't become just like the community you live in. Don't look just like everybody else, but live good lives. Invest. Be about the community. Don't give up. Don't surrender. Don't get sucked into everything, but pay attention to what's around you. We are foreigners. We're exiles, and we may live here, but we are the citizens of the other kingdom. And I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I wrote it down. I'm going to say it anyway. But please understand my heart on this. As followers of King Jesus, our battle cry is not take our country back. Our battle cry is seek the peace and prosperity of the city. There's a big difference there. There's a huge, huge, massive difference there. We can affect more change around us when we come to do good than we can by just trying to fight back at every turn. But to do this, we have to stop seeing the place where we live and the people around us as the enemy. We need to be praying for them. Are we praying for them? Are we praying for those that have opposite and opposing ideas to us? Are we praying? Are we seeking their good? Are we seeking our good, which is the same? Where we see enemies become friends and societal problems begin to find solutions. And when we do this, we get to say, look at our amazing God and our amazing Jesus while we do it. After all, when we do, we're following in the footsteps of Jesus. This is what it's about. Think about how he lived. What did he do? He sought the peace, the wholeness, and the prosperity of his city. He went around and he preached a message of releasing of bondage of sin and religion, to heal those who needed care and to feed those who were hungry. And let's not forget the words of Jesus in Matthew 25. When he says this, he says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat, and I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Move a little further, and basically they will ask, "When did we do these things?" And the king will say, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." There's a fact that we all have to face, is that we live in one of the most blessed places in the world. We have more resources than ever. Even when we are maybe lower middle class, we still have much more than most people around the world. What can we do when we together say, let's tackle some of the things in our community? What can we not do when we join together our resources, our time, and we say we're going to renew our community? I mean, part of this is the reason we began the Ashworth Community Development Corporation. Part of it was just to look and say, how can we strategically and intentionally go after the greatest areas of need that exist around us? We're not looking to recreate the wheel. We're not going to sit here and say, hey, I got a great idea. Let's start a food pantry. Why would we do that? DMARC is doing an amazing job. They have 20 plus food pantries all around our city. So you know what we do? Every month we write them a check as a church. 10% of everything you give goes to DMARC. Well, not 10%, but 10% of the missions, I should say. We give that because that's important. But we do know that there are needs, there are gaps that are not being fulfilled. And we want to figure those out and do something about it. So here's what I would encourage you to do this week. I'm going to encourage you to take time to do the spiritual practice of listening. Anybody else have trouble listening, or is it just me? Thank you. I'm not alone. Anybody find that when you find that silence and solitude, when you get it after your kids hopefully go to bed, that your mind is like, you know, my brain is speaking in tongues evidently because I can't decipher anything that's going on there. I want to encourage you this week. This isn't a guilt-inducing thing. This isn't saying if you miss a day, you're a horrible Christian. No, I just want to encourage you. Maybe you need to pull out your phone right now and you know that at 9:30 at night, right before you go to bed, that's the quiet moment in your house. Can you find 5 or 10 minutes to just sit, turn off the phone, turn off distractions, find a comfortable place to sit, and just pray something like this? God, Father, I'm here, I'm listening. Will you show me how I can seek the peace and prosperity of my community? Will you speak to me now? And then just sit there. You know, if you have a smartwatch, you've got a little timer function, you can put a timer on it. Ooh, it must tell me my time's done. The back is saying, get off the stage. Set a timer on your watch if you want to. You know, sometimes we think 5 minutes is a long time. It is. Sometimes you start doing this exercise and you get about 2 minutes in and you're like, has that been 5? No. But would you do that? Would you take time this week? And maybe set a goal. Set a goal. Say, I'm going to do that 3 times this week. I'm going to do it 5 times this week. I'm going to do it every night this week. I'm going to do it. And remember, you're not doing this on your own. As you do this, as God speaks, would you then turn back to somebody else? Maybe your spouse, maybe a close friend, and then share with them what God is saying. You remember last year when we were talking about mission initiatives, and we encouraged people and we said, hey, we want to support you in what God wants to do through you. And Warren and Char Brady stood up and said, we want to do a hot dog ministry at Bidwell Riverside. And we said, great. What if you have your hot dog ministry just waiting, but we're too busy to listen to get that from God? It's all about what God wants to speak to us. And so I want to encourage us. Let's be quiet this week. 5 to 10 minutes, and let's listen. And then let's share it. And through our words and actions, let's do this. Let's commit together to say, you know what? We will continue to seek the peace and the prosperity of our community. Let's pray.